expertise and background of some of our experts at AISE. So on today's session, we have Deborah Spindelman. Deborah is our inclusive education expert. Deborah, thank you for making out time for this conversation. I know it's been a long day for you, right, with several meetings, so really appreciate it. Would you mind introducing yourself a bit?
Yes, absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here. My name is Deborah Spindelman. I am from the United States. I hold a Master's of Public Administration in Development practice from Columbia University, as well as a degree from Cal State Long Beach in Anthropology and Women's Studies. I'm finishing up my PhD this year at the University of Cambridge in education. And my background is very broadly defined, looking at capacity development in education, gender space, with a real focus on inclusion and intersectoral efforts between health and nutrition, as well as gender, livelihoods, WASH, and how that all comes together and affects students, young people, and learning outcomes.
Oh, fantastic. I mean, I know about your background because I've seen your CV, but hearing you say it, it's very impressive. And tell us a bit more about that because it's interesting that you went from having your degree in women's studies and anthropology into education. So what sparked that interest in education?
Excellent. So through anthropology, I became just in love with the many ways of being human in the world, and so interested in life, not just in a very diverse country where I'm from, the United States, but far those borders. I actually had an opportunity in university, or during my university years, I was a professional surfer. Which I don't think you knew this before, but I surfed professionally and had the chance to travel around the world, particularly in Polynesia and Mexico, Latin America, and up and down the west coast of the United States for surfing, and it was an incredible opportunity, and as well as in Latin America more broadly. But getting to meet people, getting to travel, getting to get pieces of their lives and their experience, curious about learning more, being a part of this, and wanted to find ways to continue doing that where I was of service in the world, to people who were ultimately supported by the work that I was doing, in doing work that was in line with their priorities. And not just surfing so much anymore, but really getting to know communities, hanging out in kitchens, in fields, and really that was actually what launched me into international development, which is, I'm one of the few people I think who've made those connections, from anthropology to surfing to international development. And so became. So go ahead.
No, continue. I was like impressed. I was like, wow, anthropology, surfing, and then international development. I mean, that takes work-life balance to a whole new level.
Absolutely. And I still love, but it's fun to not do contests anymore,
Wow.
and to not try to pay my bills with it. So now that moved me in, an interest in education. I've worked with youth for most of my life in one way or another. My youngster has a range of developmental disabilities, and helping to raise her and support her development in so many ways of navigating through childhood, through development, and seeing how valid those ways were, and as well as how, with the right supports and the right enabling environment, that there's so much that we're all capable of, and that we can all contribute to one another. So that really formed sort of the ethos that grounded my interest in inclusive education worldwide, and began working 2014. No, I'm sorry, 2009, in rural, a secondary school in rural Kenya, working with young girls, women who in some writing and creative writing and self-expression through the arts, particularly photography. This time when girls' education was really gaining steam, and there wasn't missing in that conversation was the voices of girls themselves who were getting this education for the first time, and they absolutely had. They just weren't being shared at high decision making levels. So that was a really powerful experience for me, and brought that back to the United States and began using that same participatory photography to elevate the voices of young people in policy making in the United States. So that was particularly with regard to health outcomes, and got a couple of laws on the books in California regarding adding to children based on their perceptions of it and how they saw it. So I work sort of brought me on to graduate at Columbia, had some incredible opportunities in Tanzania and in Kenya through that, in education, particularly focused on girls' education or those who were previously marginalized or not included in systems, and became more curious how that access isn't just the most important point. Access is certainly a key first point, but making sure that developed and made to meet the needs of learners as those learners become more and more diverse as time goes on, and more children have access and are in school for the first times. That became very important to me, and I began working then in stunting and malnutrition prevention.
Fantastic.
And things are sort of combining in my doctoral research, looking at how stunting or very early childhood malnutrition affects cognitive development, and the specifics of that affects how students show up in the classroom, and their learning from there. So, and how we can best meet the needs of, as I said, our increasingly diverse learners at the primary and secondary school level. So that work has really brought me here into AISE.
No, it's really, I remember one of our first conversations where, because of course, I've had some experience working with children with special needs, but I like the way you sort of coined and explained what you meant by inclusive education. And I think that is, of course, your background in education and working in different communities is very important, but the fact that you also focus on people that are sometimes forgotten in broad education programs, I think is very important. And you said something earlier about from your own personal experience. Could you tell us a bit more about that? How that sparked that interest specifically on inclusive education?
Absolutely. So not only is my youngest sister an incredible young woman, an amazing sense of humor. I actually have three sisters. I'm lucky enough. But my youngest sister has a variety of developmental disabilities, and uses different forms of speech, both communications devices, a bit of sign language, and bits of speech. And not only did I grow up, I'm older than she is, so definitely took a very maternal, big sisterly role in her upbringing. But at the same time, mother actually had in our home a childcare that specialized in children with a variety of special needs, both medical and developmental, and was a really powerful space to grow up in, literally inside inside my home, and to see so many different children, and so, again, so many different ways progressing through milestones, and what those wins feel like, and the creativity required to figure out how to make it in an individual level for different children, and sort of the validity of so many different ways of progressed childhood. So I know that was really influential to me. And fast forward, so when I was in secondary school, my mother went back to school and became an education teacher. And that all was very influential to me. And I returned regularly to teach, to support her in her classroom. That's when I was studying education and was nearby, and seeing the way that she engaged all of her capabilities in supporting secondary students to read for the first time, and who had not only learning difficulties, but also had a very high risk in that area involvement of with law enforcement. There's a very, very high risk of teen pregnancy among her female students. And so to see all of those pieces coming together and how they affected her students, and yet how she met them and their needs, and met them as whole and complete students and young people was obviously inspiring to me. And in fact, it was only, oh gosh, maybe 10 years later, and when I was working in Tanzania with some education workers, some of whom had clearly been affected by stunting and had been struggling a little bit with some of the training materials, which were frankly very boring. You know, it was sort of a death by PowerPoint
Yeah,
experience,
no,
and they weren't very engaging.
no, I must say, like, when you were telling us
You
that,
know,
when you were sharing your experiences and talking about photography, and because I think for most people, when they think about education specialists, they're thinking about people who are like pouring through books and curriculums and kind of, have validated tests and, talking about creativity and how you include that in your work is just fascinating. So please continue. I just wanted to note that. Yeah. Yeah. No, please continue. Yeah.
absolutely. And it's been very important to me to make sure, and has been very real throughout my doctoral journey, to keep children and young people as real in my in my work and in my mind, and not just sort of as an academic concept.
Yeah.
which when you're so deep in those books. So I've been very committed to ongoing engagement in whatever community that I'm in, working with young people, and it reminds me so much of the creativity, of the tremendous strengths that students have and the young people have, regardless of labels their background may assign to them. That they are absolutely just the agency and the creativity. And the humor and the joy that they bring is a really important thing to keep in that work. But fast forwarding to this time in Tanzania, I reckon that some of the community education workers, who are these incredibly committed volunteers, were struggling a bit with learning some of the training materials, but not in a way that was insurmountable, in a way that reminded me in some ways of some of my mother students who just needed a different approach to the learning, and a bit more individualized, more engaging. And that when those approaches were brought in, that not only did those community education workers understand better, but everyone really benefited from that. And that really underscores, is a personal experience that underscores the optimism I bring to this research, and my focus on inclusion, that people, such a wide variety of learners, not only can learn and benefit, but contribute, and bring valuable perspectives and
Okay.
experiences and strengths that have come from the coping mechanisms they've developed to work around the challenge they faced, that really
Definitely.
all learners and teachers benefit from.
No, definitely. And it's interesting. It must have been yeah, it must have been very new for you as well, because I can imagine traveling to Tanzania and Kenya. No, you also did some work in Ghana, if I'm correct, right? And you mentioned also being in
Yes. So my
South America as well. So for me, it's really interesting to have worked in those different contexts and worked with very different kinds of youths, and yeah, it's also very impressive to hear you talk about some of the nuances and issues about, adapting the educational materials to context and trying to understand what are some of the obstacles to them learning. And and also, yes, you're currently working on an education bid for in with AISE Consulting in Nigeria. Could you tell us a bit more about that? We feel very lucky to have you on the project as well, but it would be nice to hear your viewpoint about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an honor to be with it, and it feels so and so important. because COVID-19 has disrupted so many aspects of our lives, and particularly teaching and learning is such a big part of that, and it's important to think carefully about the different equity dimensions of that option, and acknowledging that really has shown up differently for many of us, and what that means. So this project with RAPA in Nigeria is looking at mediating the consequences of COVID-19 school years, and the time away school on all students, but particularly girl students, and what that means, not just for their academic and their ability to sit all important exams, but also their psychosocial well-being and support systems that schools have been able to provide in terms of protection from gender-based violence or just gender-based discrimination. We know that a lot of that is part of what's been interrupted as schools have done a better job over the years of supporting the whole student and supporting, building again that enabling environment for students to be able to learn, and to the place where they can feel safe enough and protected, so that school can be a learning space. So what does that mean when that's been for several months? It's an honor to be working on and being curious about this, and building what this first step is, a baseline stuff. What do we have now as schools are opening up, like this week?
Yeah.
Where are students? Who's missing? Why are they missing? And what equity dimensions to those who have not been able to return, those who did not learn as much as their colleagues when they returned, and who each students are as they return to the school setting is an incredibly interesting subject, and I'm honored to be part of the exploration.
No, and we're very excited to have you on board as well. And just the discussions with you and the perspective and the wealth of experience you bring to the project has been really beneficial for AISE. And then I want to ask, so, from my perspective, you're a superwoman, you're a surfer, anthropologist, gender expert, education specialist, um, um, you're a family person, because I know you're also married as well. And how do you combine all of these things plus completing your PhD as well at the University of Cambridge? So, so if you have any words of advice on how to be, I don't know, manage so many tasks and do them so well, please, yeah. In essence, what I'm asking is if you could share a few words of advice to yourself if you were, I don't know, 10 or 20 years younger, what would you say? What would be your core advice about work-life balance and being able to achieve so many accomplishments that you've done already? Yeah.
I love that question, and I love thinking back to a younger version of myself as well. I'm the first in my family to pursue a doctorate, to do work internationally. So a lot of this was something that I didn't necessarily have. I had a lot of family emotional support, but no targeted advice. So I think getting clear on what is meant, what myself about work-life balance, and timeline on which I consider that. So of all the things that I love doing, I realize that I can't really balance all this perfectly within a 24-hour period, but figuring out what that needs to mean for me. So on a weekly or monthly basis, that I'm balancing all of the work life things and physical activity and moving my body and spending time being connected with my family and my dear husband. So figuring out the time cycle of that. I may not have very many perfectly work-life balanced days, but I do aim to have that balance in each week, and to make sure that I'm hitting each of these goals and taking time for myself and to care for myself is really important. And also making sure that work is something that I'm passionate about, because it is a lot of work and a lot of hours and work. I'm so privileged in this moment that the technology is there, that we can be working simultaneously across so many time zones, but often that means a 5 a.m. and knowing what that understand that the work behind it, and the impact that it is intended to have, is really something that makes it, to me. Absolutely. I've told people who are starting their PhD that it's important that they be so passionate about their tech, that they, on some level, are not sure why why other people are doing anything else, because they're so passionate about that. And if you find that and you feel that connected to that work, that's really what you need to push through the moments when you're all alone in your office for hours working. It needs to be something that you can connect to how you want to have an impact in the world, and to be able to see that you're the person for this specific role, and to see where you fit in, and have the humility to realize that you're a really small part of this much bigger work, and that there's always stuff to learn. And making sure, the thing that's been the most important to me, particularly over the pandemic, is making time to connect, with people who are like-minded, who appreciate this work, and not necessarily that we're diving into the tech difficulties, but just to feel that comradeship and solidarity of, we're all working on these things, on challenging things that are making the world better, and really love the problems, of the issues that we're dealing with, that we find them interesting, fascinating, challenging, definitely, but that we're excited to try to tackle. And I feel like I'm really fortunate, again, not just to work with AISE because of the scope of the interesting work. So the people I get to work with, you, Emilomo, Mukhtar, Dr. Ogbe, anyone that I've really gotten to engage with, feel like we're all working together on this, and have a heart for this, and also a mind for it. And it's having those relationships, is really what keeps the momentum moving forward.
No, and I have to say, Deborah, and every time I engage with you, you light up. Like, I don't know how to explain. I know it might sound a bit far-fetched, but you can. I have been on so many meetings where I was doing consultancies, also consultancies with other people remotely, and sometimes when you keep talking about the same subject matter, you become bored with it, or when it's a call and it's just audio or video and you haven't met that person, or you're not sitting with the person in the same room, you are not always engaged. But with you, every time there's a call or every time we have conversations, you bring the passion in your voice. And when there's a video call, you light up, you're very engaged from beginning to the end. And I think what you said about being passionate about your work really rings true for you, because it's there. You don't need to say it. It's really obvious. And I have to say, it's been a pleasure to work with you, and we're looking forward to all the opportunities and collaboration opportunities we'll have. So